on, everybody? It's your boy Gsluke here for our weekly course breakdown for the Charles Schwab Challenge. Boy, the PGA Championship was a fun one, also a profitable one for us. That ending was, sad to see for Mito Pereira, one of our sweethearts here on the channel that I talk about all the time, but boy, did Justin Thomas or Willie Z deserve that. I mean, just played by far the best golf of the week and some of the most difficult conditions for a Justin Thomas as well. So maybe the golf gods were, doing their thing there with karma, making sure that Justin actually got the championship he deserved. And oh boy, was that nice from the outright market. On Prize Picks, we had an insane day there on Sunday. So overall, feeling pretty good about last week and excited to hop into this week's event. So we're going to talk about the course in detail here, talk about a hole-by-hole analysis, my favorite key stats for this week, also my favorite comp courses, and give you an idea of the field, right? What to expect from the world's best this week, because the field also one of the better that we've seen for this event. Even though it's after a major championship, a lot of early commitments from players that played pretty well last week, like a JT and a Will Zalatoris, will be teeing it up down there in Fort Worth. So whether you are a veteran DFS player, an outright bettor for golf, or brand new to the sport, we're going to make sure you know everything you need to for this week by the end of this video. So we have a ton to talk about. Going to try and do this in as concise a format as possible. Let's go ahead and get right on into it. All right, we'll start off with a look at the field, which is an 120-man invitational style field, so smaller than what we're used to seeing on tour, 24 less than the 144, and of course much smaller than the 156 golfer field that we had for the PGA. But a lot of the notables, a lot of the top 10 players in the world, guys like a Jordan Spieth, Scotty Scheffler, Colin Morikawa, also notables like a Daniel Berger, Abraham Ancer, Sam Burns, Tommy Fleetwood, who finished top 5 last week, guys like Taylor Gooch, Sungjae Im, Victor Hovland making an appearance at this event, Jason Kokrak, past winner, same thing with Kevin Na, Mito Pereira, who came also close last week, Patrick Reed, Justin Rose, Webb Simpson, Gary Woodland, and your two playoff candidates, guys like Justin Thomas and Will Zalatoris. So like I said, an absolutely star-studded field. Might even see Bryson DeChambeau tee it up for the first time since his wrist injury. So I'm expecting absolute fireworks. It is just the week after the PGA Championship, but a much stronger field than I think a lot of us would have at least guessed 2 weeks ago. The cut line roll is the top 65 in ties. So it's because there's just 120 players in the field. That means that a majority will be making it to the weekend. The historical cut line here has been over par, but it's been in that -2 to +2 range over the last 4 events. It was +1 in 2021, -2 in 2020, +2 both in 19 and 2018. Past champions include Jason Kokrak, who won last year at -14. Jordan Spieth finished in second. You also have Daniel Berger, who won at -15, Kevin Na at -13, and Justin Rose at -20. And now to talk about the golf course. So we know it's going to be a relatively difficult test because a lot of those cut lines were over par, but we've also seen winners take it to nearly 20 under par. So while scoring can be hard to come by, if you have your best stuff, you're going to be out there, out there and scoring. We've seen that year after year, especially when Justin Rose took it to -20, and that's because this is a relatively short golf course, just 7,200 yards for a par 70. It is a Perry Maxwell design, which is the same designer of Southern Hills Country Club, one of the more prominent architects in this part of the country. And the one thing I'll say about Colonial Country Club is that it is a traditional golf course. It's much more about precision than it is about power off the tee. You're talking about greens that are relatively small, iron shots that are relatively difficult as a result. You have that Texas wind, which can and probably will become a factor for at least 2 or 3 of the rounds this weekend. And as a result, you're looking at this being a second shot golf course, as most of these traditional designs are. It's a little bit, I'd say, outdated, right? We've seen this golf course has been around since the early 1930s. It was only right around 6,200 yards when it first opened. So of course they've lengthened it over 1,000 yards since its inception. But at this point, these bombers can just absolutely tear this place apart if they want to. But because it's so well designed, they have a hard time doing so. You have a lot of tree-lined fairways, a lot of dog-legged holes, and it's hard to just pull driver on every single hole. You'll hear players that say they're so tempted to do so because if you can drive the ball in the fairway with a driver here on every hole, you're going to have a wedge into every single green. But that's just not possible. All the dog legs, all the relatively narrow fairways, it's Texas, so you get a little bit of extra rollout with all of your drives because it's so firm out there. It makes for a very interesting setup. So a lot of times, players are hitting less than driver off the tee here. You're going to see a lot of fairways hit for those type of players, or you're going to see players be extremely aggressive and really go for it. Somebody that did that last year was Jason Kokrak. He hit a ton of drivers off the tee compared to a lot of his peers, and he kept it in the short grass. So that's really one of the ways to go out there and succeed at Colonial Country Club. The other, and maybe more traditional way, the way that we see a lot more often, what guys like Daniel Berger, Kevin Na, and Justin Rose did was take less than driver off the tee, be extremely accurate, really lean into that iron play and make a ton of putts. So it's a golf course where pretty much anybody can win. It's one of the few weeks where you're not looking at only bombers winning or only players last week that were really good around the green. This week, really, if you're solid in one or two categories and you get hot in those categories, you can ride that to success. So let's talk about some of the reasons for that. Like I said, relatively small greens. They are 5,000 square foot per green on average. They are running a rate around 12s as well. So that's the centimeter reading last year. It did get closer to a 12.5, maybe even a 13 by Sunday there in 2021. So I would expect that to be the case as well. That is an A4 bent grass surface. So not the pure distinction bent grass that we had over there at Southern Hills, but a very similar strain. So you could look at some of the putting numbers from Southern Hills as a little bit of a correlation. In terms of the fairways, they are a little bit narrower than the PGA Tour average. In fact, 2 yards narrower than what we're used to seeing. And it is a Tifway 419 Bermuda grass. So also kind of similar to what we've seen over the years over at these Texas golf courses. You're going to have their Bermuda grass fairways, but also their Bermuda grass rough. So it's a Bermuda grass mix. So it's not just Tifway 419, a few other strains in there, but it is 3 inches long. And that is nothing to forget about. That is going to be extremely impactful there. Anytime the rough gets over 2 inches, that's something that we have to keep an eye on. When it gets over 3 inches, that is borderline gnarly, borderline unfair for some of these players. So driving accuracy always going to be a factor at this golf course. Like I said, you either have to hit every single fairway with your driver or, lay up off the tee like a majority of players will, and lead into that driving accuracy. So because the rough is as penal as it is going to be a factor once again. In terms of elevation change, there's not much to speak of because Fort Worth is so flat, but there is a lot of weather to think about. It's Texas. We see a ton of wind. We saw it in Oklahoma, right? Only a few hours north there in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So I would expect a similar type of effect this week. All right, let's go hole by hole now and give you a taste of what this golf course has to offer. So starting with hole number 1, it is one of the 2 par 5s on property, 563 yards, and should be reachable for pretty much the entire field. Even if you're playing into the wind, right, it's going to play 590, 600 yards at most. So if you're getting it out there 310, 320 yards with your drive, like you should be with a lot of these firm fairways, should have no problem at least getting around the green in 2. So is a birdie hole. They make the par 5 here on number 1 to kind of give you a handshake, right? Give you a chance of getting out there, posting a score early. In terms of the trouble off the tee, it's there, right? You have a few bunkers down the left side. You also have the tree-lined fairway down the right. So you might have to lay up after your first shot, but you're still at most going to have a wedge into this green. The layup zone does have a few bunkers in it, but get it in the short stuff, and you're going to be left with something in the 100 down to 50 yard range, right? The more aggressive you are, the more bunkers that you bring into play. So I'd expect a lot of players to maybe lay up to right around 120, 130 yards where there's no hazards in play. You're going to have that wedge into the green. But if you decide to be a little bit aggressive, right, you have that 50-yard bunker shot. It's not like you're going to go out there and make a 6 or a 7. So this is a handshake. It's about as easy a hole you're going to find around this property. Hole number 2 is what we'd expect for most of these holes. You get the gentle dogleg from the left to the right. Not that many hazards off the tee. You do have the 1 fairway bunker down the right side, that group of trees and bunker down the left, but get the ball in play here. A lot of people will be clubbing down, hitting something like a 3-iron or hybrid off the tee. and again leaving another wedge. So you can see there's going to be a lot of emphasis on wedge play this week, because if you're just one of those players that's taking this to be a positional golf course, you're going to have a wedge in hand a lot more often. And even if you're hitting driver, banging it out there, right, you're still going to have that 50-yard shot with the wedge. So pretty much no matter how you're taking this apart, you're going to have to be stout in that category. Hole number 3 is one of the longer par 4s. It's 478 yards. It's a severe dogleg from right to left. You have the fairway bunkers down the left side that if you overcook the ball, you're going to end up in. And this is one of the more difficult tests on the golf course because it is such a difficult driving hole. If you end up in this rough over here to the right, you're dealing with a 200-plus yard approach shot out of some 3-inch Bermuda grass, right? So this is a hole that you're just hoping to make par on. And get on to hole number 4, which is also no cupcake. It's 250-yard par 3. A lot of times it plays into the wind. You have these 2 fairway bunkers, or say greenside bunkers, to the left side of the surface. Another hole that you're just hoping to make par on. So as much as hole number 1 is a handshake, I'd argue that hole number 2, also another relatively gettable hole. You get hit with it at holes number 3 and 4. So that kind of shows you the identity of the golf course. At hole number 3, you had a 200-plus yard approach shot. Same thing with hole number 4. On holes number 1 and 2, it was 120 yards and less, if not less than that, right? If not something closer to 50 yards, something along those lines. So just understand that you're going to have a wide variety of golf shots around Colonial Country Club. Hole number 5 is another long par 4, this time a dogleg to the right. You have a severe tree line down the right, which will pretty much make your ball unplayable if you end up in it. Down the left, a little bit less trees, a little bit more sparse. So if you're going to miss, you're going to want to miss to the left. But if you don't end up in the fairway here at hole number 5, you're likely looking at par at best, right? You're not going to end up birdieing out of either of those situations. So get the ball on the surface, 2-putt, and get it out of there with a par. I think a lot of players be pretty stoked about that. Hole 6 is a 402-yard par 4. It's a gentle dogleg from left to right. It's one of the more gettable holes out there, but you got to put it in the fairway. You've got to get it in the short stuff, set yourself up for an easy wedge into this green, because if you end up in either of these fairway bunkers to the left or the right side of this fairway, you're looking at a pretty difficult shot into this green. Like I said, they're small targets, just 5,000 square foot on average, and also they have a relatively high amount of undulation. It's not like what we saw at Southern Hills or what we see at Augusta National, but it is a Perry Maxwell design, and he loved to add undulation to his courses. Hole number 6 is 431 yards. One of the straighter golf holes around Colonial. You can see it doesn't dogleg in either direction. It's also one of the more difficult as a result. I don't know what it is, but tour players do not like a hole that's straight up, particularly a hole that's straight up and has a tree-lined fairway. So it's one of the more difficult holes to actually hit the fairway on. You have this fairway bunker down the right. Again, the forest down the left and the right side, which can make approach shots extremely difficult. So one of the holes where you can see driving accuracy really poking its head out. Hole 8 is another 200-plus yard par 3. So this is going to be, I would say just a feature or a characteristic of Colonial is that you're always going to have these 200-plus yard approach shots or something in a 100-yard range, right? Those middle tier iron shots and the 150 to 175 or even the 125 to 150 range are extremely underutilized around this venue. Hole 9 is 398 yards, so another one of those extremely short par 4s, a gentle dogleg from left to right. There are quite a few bunkers in place, so a lot of people will choose to hit an iron off the tee to potentially even lay short of them and set up something closer to 130 to 150 yards into the green, or maybe even take it past the bunkers, be a little bit more aggressive up into this landing area. Either way, it is another birdie hole that you're hoping to take advantage of before making the turn. And now that we're on the back 9, you're going to see the intensity, maybe the difficulty actually get ratcheted up even a little bit more. So if you start off on hole number 10, it is nowhere near the same type of handshake that hole number 1 is. Of course, it being a par 5, but this is still a relatively short par 4, just 400 yards. It's a little bit difficult off the tee. You got to make sure that you're keeping it in the short stuff. A lot of people will end up hitting it through the fairway and into some of this rough or missing to the left or the right. But if you get it in the short stuff, you are accurate. You're going to have a birdie opportunity, just a wedge into this green. So if you're starting on 10, just hope your guys get it in the fairway off the tee. That's going to be the hardest step there. Hole 11 is a 3-shot par 5. It's 631 yards. But like we saw over there in Oklahoma, you get one of these holes downwind, you're going to have a chance at the green. So still like a lot of the longer hitters' chances to maybe set up a few eagle looks here, but another hole that you're looking to just get out with a birdie, right? Set up a wedge into the green, lay up here to right around 100 yards, hit it in there to 5 to 10 feet and make a putt. That's going to be most players' avenue to success at hole number 11. Hole number 12 is a slight dogleg from right to left. It's a pretty easy hole. It's 440 yards. Hit the ball in the fairway, and you're going to be left with a wedge. You can see that most players will hit it out here 280, 290 yards. Now, the longer hitters are going to be able to take these out of play by flying it something closer to 290 to 300 yards on the fly. But you'll have to see what people do, right? The shorter hitters, a lot of them are just going to hit 3-wood, try to stay out of these bunkers. Longer hitters, probably going to be a little bit more aggressive. So because of the bunker placement here, you will see a few different strategies employed, but a relatively easy hole nonetheless. Hole 13 is a near 200-yard par 3, but what makes this one a little bit more difficult than the rest is, of course, the water in play. Any type of a mishit will end up going into that water hazard, and you're looking at taking a drop over here to the left, and that's also not a bargain, right? You're hitting over the water once again, and particularly to some of these front pin locations, you could see quite a few penalty shots. Hole 14 is 454, also a gentle dogleg from the right to the left. Another hole, if you can get it into the fairway, you can take advantage of, but if you miss the fairway, could be looking at just trying to scramble a par out. So get it in the short stuff, driving accuracy rearing its head once again. Hole 15, a short par 4. You can see it doglegs from left to right. A little bit more hazards in play, especially off the tee, where you can see that there's fairway bunkers both down the left and the right side, and this green is heavily bunkered. So it's one of the better protected holes that we have here on property, but pretty much like every hole around Colonial, if you can get the ball in play, you're going to have success. This hole 16 is another hole with water in play. You can see there's a retention lake in front. Now it's not as much in play as what we saw for the other par 3 on this 9, but you have a few bunkers in play to the left and the right side. Get the ball on the green 2-putt. I think a lot of players would be pretty stoked about that. Hole 17 is 380 yards, a positional hole pretty much for everybody. So even if you're one of the longer hitters that wants to take a shot at this green, get it up there to flip wedge range. First off, very small fairway, non-existent up towards the green, so you're not going to be hitting off of the short stuff. You also have a water hazard over here to the right, a little canyon that takes balls into that water hazard. If you miss to the left and you're blocked out by trees, that's not a very favorable situation either. So, all right, and now for hole number 18, which isn't quite as memorable as most finishing holes at these, traditional courses that we've seen for quite some time, but it'll have to do for this type of venue. It's 435 yards, gentle dogleg from right to left. Not much of a hazard in play at all off the tee, right? Even the forests aren't very dense around this 18th fairway, but even the green, where you have this water on the left, it's not really in play, right? You'd have to really hit, a hook or even a shank to the left side to end up getting into it. A lot of balls are going to end up in this bunker over here or over here to the right side, completely avoiding the lake altogether. So get the ball on the green. It is a relatively small target there. One of the smaller greens that we have on property also has a ton of undulation, so that's a lot of the defense of this 18th hole. But from the ball striking perspective, right, relatively straightforward hole. What we're used to seeing for a majority of the round here around Colonial. And again, probably not going to decide the golf tournament, but if you go out there and do something stupid and hit it over there to the left in the lake, could make things a little bit interesting come Sunday. All right, now that we've seen the golf course, let's talk about some of my key stats for analysis. So at number 1, we have shots gained approach, which, I know, right? Shocking, right? To see shots gained approach at number 1, but it's always going to be there, at least going to give it 2 to 3 seconds of airtime here because this is a second shot golf course. Like I said, it is a traditional setup, a lot more about precision than it is power off the tee. And you're going to see a lot of players playing from the exact same spot. I showed you guys a lot of the different layup areas that players will be hitting to. Some of the bombers might be a little bit more creative with their approach, but a majority of the field just needs to hit better iron shots than their peers. Because you're clubbing down, I expect driving accuracy to be a little bit higher for those players than the guys that are going out there and bombing, and that's why it finds itself there at number 1. Now, the one caveat I'll mention is that we're going to be focusing a lot more on the wedge range, so that'll be the 50 to 125 range and the 200 plus yard range. As you saw throughout the video, there's going to be quite a few wedge shots on those 430 yard par 4s, and you're going to have a ton of 200 plus yard shots on the longer par 4s, the 600-yard par 5, and pretty much every single par 3. So there's going to be a lot more emphasis towards the extreme ends of the spectrum when it comes to those proximity ranges. So that is going to be weighted in my modeling. At number 2, we have shots gained putting, specifically on bent grass. It's going to be a majority of my focus this week because this is a second shot golf course and we do see a winning score in that 13 to 20 under par range. You're going to have to make some putts. And the one thing about Colonial that really gives it some of its character, I'd say, would be the undulation. Much like we saw at Southern Hills, it does have quite a bit, and while it's not as extreme as what we saw at Southern Hills Country Club, it is going to be a factor. You'll see quite a few 3 putts at this venue, and putts in that 5 to 10 foot range that might be gimmies at a course that's more of a resort style are still going to be a tough ask here. You can see 2 to 3 inches of break on every single one of those putts, if not more, if you end up on a little bit more of a tricky pin location. So that comes in at number 2. Also taking a look at putting last week, I think that's something that we could use a little bit, I'd say, weigh it a little bit more this week. It's a little bit more important than some of the other recent form metrics that we have, potentially some of the putting at Texas golf courses over the years. At number 3, we have driving accuracy. Another key thing that we identified through a lot of the hole-by-hole breakdown is just the importance of getting it in the flat stuff, right? Not being in that 3-inch Bermuda grass mix, which is going to be devilish for the players this week. Also making sure that you're setting up wedges into these greens. It's as positional of a golf course as we're going to get. So hunkering down on driving accuracy is a key factor. Now, not every player that's had success at Colonial has been accurate. I mean, Jordan Spieth, right, who finished in second, also has quite the track record around Colonial, is not very accurate off the tee. So just understand that it's not an end-all, be-all, but for a majority of the field that is not going to be extremely, I'll say, aggressive off the tee and hitting a ton of drivers, the accuracy component is what we want them to have. A few of the other key stats that I will be considering this week would be shots gained around the green. Because we have relatively small surfaces, just 5,000 square foot per green, you're going to hit plenty of shots to get up and down, but not anything that's a drastic factor this week like what we had for Southern Hills. Par 4 scoring is important with the 12 par 4s. Shots gained in Texas conditions is always something I look at when we're at one of these venues. Birdie or better percentage and shots gained approach out of Bermuda grass rough. This is nasty rough, gnarly 3-inch plus Bermuda grass rough. Taking a look at some of the better players over the years in that category might be worth a few looks as well. And now lastly, for our comp courses. So the courses I expect to play the most similar to what we see this week. At number 1, we have TPC Southwind. So in Memphis, another extremely hot climate, also tends to be a little bit firmer and fast around there. Another par 70 positional golf course where it's all about hitting solid approach shots and making putts on relatively undulated greens. So a lot of parallels that we can make between what we're going to see at Colonial and then what we see at TPC Southwind. And the winning score is in that same type of range. So just a lot of parallels that can be made there. So I think it's worth taking a look at some of those finishes. At number 2, we have Harbor Town Golf Links. That's a golf course where you have the RBC heritage. It's a short golf course, positional. You have the tree-lined fairways, relatively small surfaces. Also some undulation on the greens, right? So it's, another one of these, Kevin Kisner special type of golf courses where he tends to have success. Kevin Na, similar type of player. You've seen those type of players have success at both venues. And Pebble Beach golf links. Now, Pebble Beach, another short golf course, positional, extremely small greens, right? That's one of the biggest characteristics that we have about Pebble Beach. But Jordan Spieth has also had success there and at Harbor Town Golf Links. So, we think of Jordan Spieth as this wild player off the tee, right? But he has a ton of success at these positional golf courses. I don't understand it. Right? From a logic standpoint, it doesn't make sense, but that's why we incorporate these comp courses, because sometimes the key stats, while they work for a majority of the field, there's these individualistic, or I should say just specific examples like a Jordan Spieth that completely buck that trend, right? So taking a look at these comp courses gives us a way to try and identify those type of players. I mean, even look at TPC Southwind, right? You've had quite a few players that have had success there that I'm probably going to be targeting this week as well, right? That maybe a little bit sneakier than most would expect. So that's what I'm looking at in terms of comp courses and in terms of some of the key stats that we talked about just before too. All right, that's all I've got for the course breakdown. Hopefully you guys feel a little bit more prepared for this week's slate, whether you're betting outrights or going to the DFS market. Before you hop on out of here, go ahead and let me know in the comments what you think the winning score will be. For me, I'm going to take 15 under par, so similar to what Daniel Berger won it at. I'd expect wind to be a factor at least one, maybe even two of the days, but if we get nasty wind like we see from time to time in Texas, might be closer to maybe 10 or 11 under par. So go ahead and let me know your thoughts down below. I'd love to hear from you. And as per usual, going to have the full slate of content this week. So whether it's for DFS, prize picks, we're going to have a betting live stream sometime on Tuesday, our weekly DFS live stream on Wednesday at 7 p.m. Just a ton to come out. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel if you haven't already so you don't miss any of that when it drops. Also, make sure you smash the like button before you hop on out of here. Helps me with growing the channel. Lets me know that you enjoy this type of content as well. Best of luck with all of your analysis, all of your betting or DFS lineups for this week. And let's get this cash.